Well, that is day one of the 2024 AFL Draft. It was eventful. It looked for a while like it was going very predictably, at least when you compare it to Cal Toomey's mock draft. And then what followed was some very surprising events. We had at least one slider that was surprising. We had a couple of bolters that were real shocks. And then we had one enormous trade we have to discuss that happened right at the end with the final pick of day one. So in today's video, we're just going to go through pick by pick and sort of react to the draft picks to discuss them as they happened. So about the first 11 picks of the day went exactly as Cal Toomey expected it, but we'll still go through it. So Sam Lawler, unsurprisingly, was taken with pick 1 by Richmond. I think this is a good call, great upside player. Not too much to discuss there. I think we know he's a good player, and we knew he was going to pick one, at least for the last few days, and perhaps longer ago than that. It was kind of telegraphed a little bit. We thought Lawler was always going to go pick 1. Pick 2, not a surprise, but at least we had an answer on whether North were going to trade this pick. Now, they could have tried and failed, and that was the rumour, maybe trading with Adelaide, but as we'll talk about later, this draft was very, very hard to trade in and out of. It was a very steep premium and very hard for teams to orchestrate deals. It's been a very interesting trade and draft period combined, but North Melbourne do get Finn O'Sullivan. It's not their only pick in today's video, but as far as players go and talent, North Melbourne add another very good midfielder. Good balance to his game as well, Finn. So, I can see him adding something a little bit different to North. They got the inside dominance in Wardlaw. They've got the outside class in McKercher. They've got Sheasel, who can play a little bit of everywhere. Obviously plays a bit on ball now too. So Finn O'Sullivan is stylistically different. And I do perhaps wonder, in an ideal scenario, could they have traded down and get a couple of tools? Potentially, but I think we're going to see evidence of the fact that, it just wasn't feasible for them to do that. So they decided not to take Toro at pick 2. And they've gone with the best available midfielder in Finn O'Sullivan. And I'm sure they won't regret that, to be honest. At pick 3, we had Carlton Jagger-Smith. I did have a sneaking suspicion this might be Sid Draper, but they've gone with a local talent, which makes perfect sense. When you have evenly rated talents, why not go the Vic Metro kid if you're Carlton? And a player that can probably contribute pretty early, given the fact that, he played VFL last year and played really well. This year, I should say. So, Jagger-Smith, as far as midfield talents goes, he's right up there with the best of them. Again, we knew this from Toomey. And Sid Draper to the Crows was also correct. So I did the video comparing Fox Footy and Toomey's mock drafts. This is the one where they diverged. Toomey went with Draper. Fox Footy expected this to be Harvey Langford, but I think a great selection here for the Crows, the right selection in my opinion. I think this guy's going to be a jet. Levi Ashcroft comes in at 5. Again, I don't really understand why that teams would not bid on a player a little bit higher than this. I can understand, maybe not pick 1. But pick 5 just seems a little bit of a stretch for me. Either way, great result for the Brisbane Lions, and they're going to take at least one more pick, and we'll have a look at where the next pick sits after Sam Marshall. Pick 6, Harvey Langford. So the D's paired Langford and Lindsay. That makes sense. They've really bolstered their midfield. Got an inside mid who can play forward in Harvey Langford. They got a balanced midfielder in Xavier Lindsay. After last year getting Caleb Windsor, a great outside midfielder. So for a team that has kind of been in the window, they've added some pretty high-level midfield talents to their list, and they offset each other quite nicely. Smiley got to the Tigers. We saw that coming. So again, no real surprises thus far in the draft. Richmond pairing another big inside bull with Sam Lawler, who can play a little bit more forward as that sort of hybrid player. St Kilda's picks are interesting. This is where I expected Cal Toomey to potentially get it wrong, just because I thought the idea of St Kilda picking no midfielders in their first 2 selections seemed odd to me. However, he was correct. They've gone Toby Travalia and Alex Taru, and I do accept the fact that Travalia could be a midfielder, but I did wonder if they maybe go Xavier Lindsay instead. However, Toomey got this bang on again, and he also, I think, got the Lombard bid right. So far, 10 out of 10 for Cal Toomey, and Alex Toru is a good selection, I think, for the Saints. I did think it was a little curious. I know they have a key back, I think, later in the draft is Adrian Cole, but Taru's talent and upside and potential versatility to play forward, and I don't know if they see midfield potential there, but such a good athlete and a good player, so they'll be happy with the best available talent there. And then Xavier Lindsay, as I discussed. Now, I was hoping he would get through to West Coast at what was 15 at the time, but again, Toomey's late mail suggested this was right, and I do think Melbourne have made the right selection here. There's no one taken after this that I think Melbourne should have taken before Xavier Lindsay, so they've really rounded out a good young midfield there so that they're ready for when Petrarca and potentially Oliver and Viney hang up the boots or potentially find other clubs. Either way, they've got a really good head start on a bit of a midfield rebuild there, so well done. This was probably the first surprise of the night. Everything we were hearing right up until the draft, including some mail by Toomey late in the piece, was that Taj Houghton to West Coast looked like it was on, but Richmond pulled a bit of a surprise here and took him here. And you look, on talent, I think this makes sense. The caveat with Houghton is just simply this done an ACL. And, that's double-sided. So there's a little bit of risk, how does that recovery go? But further to that, the sample size of him being a genuine midfielder is a little bit smaller. However, I think the kid's got serious game, and I think he will be a good long-term player. On talent, I don't mind this selection for Richmond. Then we had the Kako bid. That was expected, I think, at least in Cal Toomey's first mock. And then Jonty Fall, this is the first big surprise because pick 14 was always going to potentially be a tall here for Richmond. And I thought almost certainly a key forward. However, Harry Armstrong, Job Shanahan, even Jack Whitlock were all rated pretty much unanimously higher than Jonty Fall, who was their eventual selection. Now, I realise there's probably not a huge gap in talent between all those boys, but he was still probably fourth back in the pecking order of who was expected to go at this pick. So did not see that coming. Big surprise. Richmond have rolled the dice on 195 centimetre key forward. I don't have a strong opinion. It was surprising, though. That was the big first surprise. So this is where the first trade happened of a pick that was at least on the clock between West Coast and Port Adelaide. And again, this one is a little bit hard to understand why. So my understanding is West Coast, being on the clock, I think presumably would have always gone Beau Allen. At least that's what people expected, and I don't know that to be a fact. Port Adelaide's motivation here to trade up ahead of West Coast was presumably to get Joe Berry. I think we can conclude that. But the biggest threat to Port Adelaide getting Joe Berry was Fremantle, who were picking after Port Adelaide anyway. Now, there might have been two competing bids for West Coast pick between Fremantle and Port Adelaide. So perhaps there's a scenario that Fremantle wanted Berry all along, wouldn't have gone Beau Allen, and Port Adelaide wanted to beat them to the punch and get West Coast pick. Now, it only cost them pick 45. It was still kind of a weird trade because I don't think West Coast was going to take Joe Berry if Beau Allen was there. And again, I don't know that to be a fact. However, Port Adelaide get their man, the small forward, who was essentially a big part of the compensation they got for Dan Houston, along with Jack Lukosius. And West Coast get their man in Beau Allen. Now, I'll do a proper reaction to West Coast pick in a video on the True Eagle channel, which should follow soon after this. But overall, I think you get the best WA talent, and he was a slider. I don't think West Coast can complain about that. I think that's a really good outcome for them. And, expected to go probably pick 11 was around about the expected pick. I think that's actually where Toomey had him. So that was something that Toomey got wrong. Now, Fremantle were on the board. This is where I started worrying that they were going to take my favourite player in the draft in Ollie Hannaford. And thankfully they didn't. They took Murphy Reid. So I got this wrong. I thought Murphy Reid would slide past the non-Victorian clubs because of a bit of a suggestion out there that he was not super keen to leave Melbourne. However, Fremantle rolled the dice there, and they took him, presumably because Joe Berry and Beau Allen might have been the other two picks that they would have taken in this scenario. But Murphy Reid is a good player. There's always going to be a little bit of a risk of a go-home factor. I won't harp on that too much. I presume Fremantle are really comfortable with his likelihood of staying, you'd have to say. And for talent selection, I think this is the right pick. I don't think Fremantle had really glaring needs, maybe a small forward, but I think this one ticks the box, certainly from a talent point of view. Then GWS pulled, not a big surprise, but Ollie Hannaford here at 18. I feel a little vindicated because I think 15 to West Coast is where I had him in the mock. I was kind of hoping that would be the case, with knowing that Beau Allen probably wasn't going to be available at the time. So that was a bit of a reach, but the fact that he only went a few picks later, like 2 picks later, makes me feel a little less silly for maybe suggesting that. The Giants reached again a little bit for Oliver, not a big reach. I think Toomey I think it was Toomey suspected that he'd go at their next pick after this, which ended up being 24. I think it's a little early for a small defender. However, he is a good player, and GWS have their order, and I'm not going to criticise them because I think they're very good at drafting in this general space. Pick 20, Cooper Hines. I think that's another Toomey pick he got right. I did think best available non-tall player was likely who they were going to go, and with Hannaford off the board and Joe Berry off the board, it really was a choice between Hines and Detoli as far as I was concerned. They went for the powerful inside mid who can arrest forward as well, to complement Riley Sanders in a young midfield group that will need to transition over the next few years. Richmond took the punt on Luke Traynor. Good result for him. A bit of an innuendo about his concussion, seeing him sliding, but in the end, Richmond were very comfortable with where that is. So they add a tall defender, intercepting third defender, who on talent is a really good pick and could probably play early. I think the way he plays as a third tall, he could play some early games and help their ball movement out of defence as well. So I think that's a good selection. Sydney then took Jesse Detoli. I had Detoli to Sydney in a couple of mocks I did. I probably thought they might have gone Jack Whitlock if he was available. That was a connection that I had made, but I also read that in other places as well. There was some interest there. In the end, they decided they didn't need a key forward. Jesse Detoli, best available small forward. I did find it interesting that he was wearing a Swans scarf in the footage. I wonder if he put that on just before that pick, thinking he might get taken by them. Good call, made for some good footage. Harry Armstrong was another pretty big slider. I had him sliding to 19 in my mock, and I thought that was ambitious. And yet he slid to 23 on the night as the second key forward taken in this draft, behind Jonty Fall and significantly behind Jonty Fall. However, that is now his teammate, and Richmond add 2 key forwards. I did always think that was possible. I thought it might take one. They've added now a tall defender and 2 key forwards. I think that makes sense. And from a talent perspective, Harry Armstrong at 23 is a really good deal. Then probably the biggest bolter of the night, Cody Angove, taking it from Claremont to GWS, another 182 centimetre forward. So it's just really interesting as a side note, the tendency of GWS to take these small forwards. So you look at their current team, you've got Bedford, you've got Brent Daniels, you've got Toby Green, if you categorise him as such. They drafted Phoenix Goddard last year, Darcy Jones the year before that, if I'm not mistaken. Now Ollie Hannaford and Cody Angove. And again, I don't know a whole heap about Angove because he wasn't considered a top 30 chance. And GWS have their own order, and I won't criticise that because I just don't know. Well, I don't know more than them, that's for sure. That being said, on consensus rankings, massive bolter. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes and how they're going to fit all these smalls into their team going forward. Brisbane Lions got Sam Marshall at pick 25, which was, I think, forecasted by Toomey, and good value. So 5 and 25 for 2 very good midfielders. I do wonder in the open pool how these guys would have gone. I think Sam Marshall, because he's a midfielder or wingman, could have gone to that top 20, and Levi might have gone pick 1 or 2. 2 big surprises at the end of the day. Ned Bowman, not a massive surprise, this one. I did think Sydney might go tall. They didn't, evidently. With Cochrane coming in as a key back, and I suppose, McDonald and Amati aren't exactly massive weak links or anything like that. I just thought it might be a good opportunity to add a tall. They ignored that option and they went for Ned Bowman, and this one is a little bit higher than Toomey had him. He had him at pick 30 to West Coast. A little bit of a bolter in terms of like the second half of this year, if I'm not mistaken. Sydney and Kinnear Beatson, I think is his name, isn't it, tend to pull some surprises. This was a little bit surprising, but not shocking either. I'd say 2 quality forwards that are different to each other is, it's probably about right for Sydney, acknowledging they get Joel Cochrane later in this draft. And we have to talk about this trade. Matt Whitlock has joined North Melbourne. So this cost North Melbourne their future first selection for Matt Whitlock at pick 27 effectively, and a future second round. So their future first becomes Richmond's future second, and they get Matt Whitlock. This on value is crazy to me because I do not sit in the camp of thinking North Melbourne will be mid-table next year. And I don't necessarily think they'll be bottom 2, but you have to consider that a distinct possibility. And let's say bottom 4, bottom 5. So we're talking about potentially pick 5 for Matt Whitlock. And it was also surprising that he went before his brother Jack. That was not expected, but not a huge shock. So essentially, let's call it pick 5 next year for pick 27. And the pick that they've traded next year, assuming Richmond wins the spoon again, if there's a similar amount of academy picks next year, and I think there's actually going to be more, and say free agency, then it's another pick 27. So I've seen some analysis saying, well, it's pick 19 next year. It's not. It's probably pick 27 again. So 5 for 27 and 27, roughly. Look, it's bold. I understand that North don't have the same value on these high draft picks. It's sort of like Gold Coast a little bit. At some point, you just got to think, no, let's do something a little bit ballsy. And they did need a key forward. And I saw a tweet from Riley Beveridge, thanks to my friend Jay from the Centre Bounce. He brought this to my attention, but he said, North Melbourne apparently offered a future first to every club from St Kilda onward. Presumably maybe to get Toru the first time, and then after that maybe it was Matt Whitlock, or maybe it was Harry Armstrong, and then maybe it was Matt Whitlock after that. I don't think I can get on board with this trade. It is too one-sided to Richmond. That being said, if Matt becomes a star, then this whole thing is completely academic. But it's a big roll of the dice, and I'm not sure about it, to be honest. However, it does speak broadly to the difficulty clubs had trading in this year's draft. So we go back to the West Coast trade of pick 3 for 12, 14, and Matt Owies. And this has the potential to be worse than that on value. But now we have 2 documented cases of just really strange assessments of pick values. Bearing in mind, North, trading live is always a little bit more expensive. But, I believe West Coast, tried other clubs before they dealt with Carlton, and it just wasn't happening. And similarly to North Melbourne, they obviously exhausted heaps of opportunities before that, before they finally got Richmond to agree. And I think Richmond come out of this looking very good. Next year, 2 top 5 picks. It could be pick 1 and 2. I'm not going to say that I think North will finish bottom 2, but I don't think they're going to shoot up the ladder. So by that logic, this was Really ballsy. So day 2 starts tomorrow with Richmond on the clock. They've already traded into the future. They'll presumably take this pick, but the first day of day 2, you get more time to consider offers. There's always that chance that they trade this pick, but I doubt it. You got the Bulldogs, you got West Coast coming up, and then the Bulldogs again. I just want to scroll down and see when other clubs who had academy players re-enter the draft. So you have Essendon at 37 and 39, and then 43 again, of course. We have Brisbane at 46, 47. They're expected to take 1 or 2 more picks, and at that range of the draft, you can still get some talls, which is apparently who they're after. The Gold Coast Suns seem to enter about 57, and it keeps going. Well, it keeps going, much further than the draft is actually going to go. But sometimes I do a day 2 mock. I don't think I'm going to do that this time. I'm going to resist the temptation because it's just so even and open-ended, and I don't think it would be that useful. However, we can talk about some good names who are left. Jobe Shanahan, did not expect him to be available at this current point in time. With the Bulldogs and Richmond picking first, I don't think either team has an appetite for a key forward. And I think it's conceivable that he gets to West Coast on the 3rd pick of the day. Christian Moraes, Tom Gross, Jasper Alger, Jack Whitlock is probably the other big name that we expect to be taken on night 1. James Barrett. These guys are probably right in range. If we're talking the guys we expect to be gone by now, you definitely think Jobe Shanahan. You definitely think Jack Whitlock, and in some cases, Jasper Alger as well. So a few surprises, a bombshell trade, a confusing trade between West Coast and Port Adelaide, couple of sliders there. Jonty Fall bolted up. Cody Angove into the top 24. It had heaps going on day 1 of this draft. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you made of the day. What did you find surprising? What do you think of the North trade? And are you happy with what your club's done so far? Well, let me hear it. I want to hear from you. And we'll be back on the True Footy YouTube channel tomorrow. Same time, live to tune in from every pick from Richmond onwards. And for Eagles fans, I'm going to do a Bo Allen reaction video immediately after this. So stay tuned. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.